Thanks for joining me on episode 995 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hey friends, my name is Dr. Gary Johnson, and I serve as the Executive Director of E2 Effective Elders. I challenge you to invest in yourself, in others, and develop your influence while impacting the world by using your time, your talent, your treasures to live out your calling. Having the ability to grow yourself through self-leadership is key. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
I've talked before about the framework I use for coaching about refocus, gain control, and set a plan. This cycle is what I'm talking about. Refocus on what's really going on. Then gain control by using certain tools and tricks and techniques. And then once you've done that, set a plan and begin to live to that plan. Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world. In today's episode about impacting the world through stewarding your treasures, I talk with you about how stress affects your finances. I share how some of the indirect effects of financial stress still affect your finances as well, and I share some tips with what you can do about that stress. As we talk about stewarding your treasures, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without costing yourself an extra dime? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show. If you enjoy the show when you're ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon. Just like on Tuesday, we talked about how stress can affect your productivity. The truth is, money and finances and stress are all connected to each other as well. In a recent survey, about 77% of Americans surveyed said they feel anxious and stressed out about their personal financial situation. About 58% said that their money or their finances are in control of their lives as opposed to them controlling their finances. Over half said that they have difficulty controlling their money and have money-related worries that they can't manage to control. And almost 70% of Americans recently have said that they're worried about having enough money to retire. And the truth is, there's a link between stress about money and stress in your life, and then stress that causes money problems. These things are all connected to each other because you end up with fatigue, you end up with difficulty concentrating, you end up with insomnia and sleep problems, and often even long-lasting health issues. But the reason money and stress are often related is because stress leads to difficulty and poor decision making, difficulty in making decisions, difficulty in seeing the long-term impacts of decisions. This is one of the reasons that people talk about retail therapy, getting worried or stressed out. And so I need to go shopping to feel better, because that dopamine hit of making a purchase does give you a temporary bump that makes you feel less stressed and less anxious. That is actually true in the short term. But the problem is that then you get home and you recognize that you were thinking about what color to buy, and you ended up spending money that you didn't have, and now you're even more stressed out, which leads you to do more retail therapy, which leads to even more stress. It's a feedback loop where the poor decision making leads to stress, which leads to poor decision making, which leads to stress. It's a negative feedback loop. The truth is, you can actually stop that cycle. There are things you can do to help it. Directly and indirectly, financial stress has a financial impact. The health impacts of stress are huge on your finances. Health care and taking care of yourself is a very large impact on your money, and stress has an impact on your health. So these things are related. And then, like I said, because it's a negative feedback loop, those health behaviors, the insomnia, the relationship difficulties, the anxiety and depression, those things lead to more money problems. There's a vicious cycle that goes on, and I've seen it in many clients. You have to break that cycle. Just like we talked about in the time factors. You need to find a way to break the cycle. And usually that means, especially with money, it means finding outside accountability. That may be with a coach, that may be with a therapist. It depends on the situation and the problem that you have. But by opening up to your family, your friends, a coach, or other professional, you can actually find a way of beginning to break that cycle. Money stress and money problems often happen in secret. When there's hidden money going on, when there's a credit card that maybe you don't know about, or when there's other things that are going on in a couple relationship, that's usually a sign of a bigger problem. And if you're a single, if you're spending money without really sitting down and thinking about the long-term impact and the long-term benefits, that's going to be a problem. So one of the other things you can do to deal with money stress is actually sit down and take inventory of your finances. Do a realistic triage of your debt, of your income, of your spending, and look to begin to make small changes. You do the cycle of planning and then tracking, check against the plan, review. Is it that the plan was wrong, or is it that my behavior is wrong? What's going on? Begin to use cash to help reduce impulse spending. Begin to make a plan and actually stick to it. I've talked before about the framework I use for coaching about refocus, gain control, and set a plan. This cycle is what I'm talking about. Refocus on what's really going on. Then gain control by using certain tools and tricks and techniques. And then once you've done that, set a plan and begin to live to that plan. The other framework that I use to describe this is plan, then review, reflect, revise, and repeat. These two things are really two different ways of saying the same idea. And that is the way to break the stress cycle. Yes, you need to do things like make sure you're doing physical exercise, make sure you're practicing meditation or relaxation, getting enough sleep, eating well, being good about your environment and taking care of what's going on. All of those things help with the stress, but you also need to attack the money behaviors. It's not the budget. It's not the plan. 90% of it is the behavior around it. And that's how you break the money stress cycle. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of treasures, you can sign up for our treasures tips by going to inspiredstewardship.com/treasures or text in the US 44222 treasures tips. And we'll send you 5 weeks of our best tips on stewarding your treasures. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.